What would make 3 men throw a grieving woman into a canyon and leave her there with no water, no way out, and a claim worth exactly $41,000? Rose Vale learned the answer on a Thursday afternoon beneath a white Arizona sun. Her father had been dead for 23 days. The funeral debt was still unpaid. The boarding house wanted $12 by Saturday. She had sold her mother's silver locket for $6.50 just to buy food on the journey west. Everything she owned now fit inside one battered valise, and the only thing her father had managed to leave her was a parcel of desert land. $41,000 was the figure written on the private appraisal he'd kept folded inside his desk. Rose had carried that paper across 200 miles of dust because she believed it meant a future. Silas Thorne knew better. The town's most powerful landholder stood behind the long counter of the Redemption Land Office, turning her father's claim between 2 thick fingers. His black coat was too fine for the heat. A gold watch chain curved across his vest. 3 men watched from the saloon doorway. Thorne looked at Rose, then he laughed. "Your father left you $41,000 worth of paper," he said. "The land itself isn't worth enough to bury a dead mule on." A few men chuckled. Rose kept her hands folded because she knew they were shaking. "That claim is recorded. Recorded doesn't mean protected." He pushed the document back across the counter. Rose reached for it. Thorne covered it with his palm. "You're a young woman traveling alone," he murmured. "You ought to understand when a town is telling you to go home. My father paid for that land. Your father made a mistake." The words landed harder than the insult. Her father had spent 12 years saving for that property. He had worked mines, haul, bed freight, slept in canvas camps, and finally believed he'd found a piece of ground where Rose could start over. Now Thorne wanted it. Rose pulled the paper free. "I'll take my claim to the territorial office." The smile disappeared from Thorne's face. That was the last mistake she made in town. An hour later, 2 hired men forced her onto a horse outside the livery. Thorne rode behind them carrying her father's papers inside his coat. They traveled west into country Rose had never seen. By sunset, the trail narrowed between towering red walls. When she finally understood where they were taking her, the blood drained from her face. Devil's Jaw. There was no settlement beyond it, no water station, no road through. Thorne dismounted. He walked around Rose's horse and looked up at her. "Your father should have taught you something," he said. Then his hand struck between her shoulder blades. The world vanished beneath her. Rose hit the canyon floor hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Above her, 3 silhouettes stood against the strip of blue sky. Thorne checked the papers inside his coat. Then they turned away. Rose tried to call out. Nothing came. A pebble rolled past her cheek. She watched it disappear into the dust. Then she noticed something moving beside the rock beneath her hand. Water. Just one dark drop. Then another. Rose woke sometime before dawn with her cheek pressed against stone. For several seconds, she couldn't remember why she was there. Then she tried to breathe. Pain knifed beneath her ribs. She rolled onto her back and stared upward. The canyon walls were black now, their upper edges barely visible against a strip of stars. Her mouth tasted of dust. She reached for the canteen she knew would not be there. Nothing. Her fingers closed around empty ground. Thorne had taken that too. Rose swallowed and immediately regretted it. Her throat felt scraped raw. She tried to sit, but the world tilted sideways. She stayed down until the spinning eased. Her father's face came to her, not from the funeral, from the kitchen 3 months earlier. He had been sitting at the little pine table, counting coins beneath the yellow light of a kerosene lamp. He had counted them twice because he never trusted himself after midnight. 41,000, he'd whispered. Rose had laughed at him. "You don't have $41,000. "No, the land does." He had tapped the folded appraisal with one dirty finger. Her father had never been a wealthy man. He owned one good coat, a mule named Bishop, and a battered rifle with a cracked stock. But he had believed that patch of desert could change their lives. He'd also told her something else. "If anybody starts asking questions about that ground, Rosie, you don't tell them what I found." She had thought he meant gold. Now she wasn't so sure. A gust of wind moved through the canyon, carrying a dry whisper of sand. Rose pushed herself upright. Her right ankle hurt, but it held her weight. Her left shoulder was worse. She tested it once and stopped. The sleeve of her calico dress was torn almost to the elbow. She looked toward the canyon walls. There was no route out. Thorne had chosen the place carefully. Rose stood anyway. She took one step, then another. Each movement sent pain through her side, but the thought of sitting there waiting for death frightened her more than the pain did. She remembered the dark patch beneath the rock. The water. Rose turned toward it. The canyon floor rose gradually on one side before narrowing into a shelf of broken sandstone. She crouched and placed her fingertips against the dirt. Damp. Not much, but real. She scraped away loose grit with her fingernails until a narrow seam appeared between two stones. Moisture gathered there slowly, drop by drop. Rose bent down and drank directly from the earth. The water tasted of minerals and mud. She didn't care. She drank until the trembling in her hands eased. Then she noticed something strange. The damp line continued behind the rocks. Rose pushed aside a flat stone. Cold air touched her face. She froze. There was no wind in the canyon. Not down here. She moved closer and found a narrow black opening between two slabs of sandstone. It was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Rose stared into the darkness. Somewhere beyond that opening, water was moving, and from deep inside the rock came the faint metallic sound of something striking stone. Once, then again. Rose reached toward the gap. Her fingers touched something hard beneath the dust, a piece of old iron. She pulled it free. It was a key. The key was cold enough to make Rose pull her hand back. She rubbed it against her skirt, then held it up to the faint starlight. Iron. Old. Rust had eaten through one side, but the teeth were still intact. She looked into the narrow opening again. For the first time since Thorne had pushed her over the edge, she felt something other than fear. Curiosity. That could be dangerous. Rose slipped the key into her pocket and widened the gap with both hands. Loose stones scraped beneath her palms. One rock came free and tumbled behind her, striking the canyon floor with a sharp crack. She stopped. No voices. No horses. Nothing. The men were gone. She lowered herself and squeezed sideways through the opening. Her shoulder caught halfway. She twisted, bit down against the pain, and shoved forward until she dropped onto cold stone inside the passage. The temperature changed immediately. Outside, the canyon had been an oven. Here, the air was cool. Rose stayed on her knees, breathing slowly. A thin stream of water moved beside her boot. She followed it. The passage descended at a gentle angle, forcing her to walk bent beneath a low ceiling. Every few yards she found another trace of iron, a rusted nail driven into the rock, a broken ring, the remains of something that had once been fastened here. This wasn't a natural passage. Someone had used it. After perhaps 50 feet, the ceiling rose. Rose straightened. A chamber opened before her. She almost laughed. There were 3 iron-banded chests against the far wall. Beside them stood 6 wooden crates, their boards blackened with age. A rolled canvas bundle rested on top of one. Dust covered everything. Rose approached the nearest chest. A small brass plate had been nailed into its lid. She wiped it with her sleeve. 3 letters appeared beneath the dirt. RRG. Rose didn't know what they meant. Ant. Not yet. She tried the key. It fit. The lock turned with a dull click. Inside were coins, hundreds of them. Gold caught the weak light spilling from the passage. Rose stared. Then she closed the lid. Money could wait. She had something more urgent to solve. The second chest had no lock. Inside were old saddles, ammunition boxes, and a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. The third contained clothing so badly decayed that touching it would have reduced it to threads. Then Rose noticed the wall. Someone had carved words into the sandstone. The letters were shallow and almost invisible beneath the dust. She brushed them clean. 4 words. Water remembers what men forget. Rose read them twice. Her father's warning returned. If anybody starts asking questions about that ground, Rosie, you don't tell them what I found. She stepped backward. The chamber suddenly felt smaller. Her father had known something. Maybe he'd found this place. Maybe he'd known about the men who had used it. And maybe Silas Thorne hadn't murdered him simply because he wanted a worthless piece of desert. Rose reached into her pocket and touched the old key. A sound came from the passage, a boot scraping stone. She turned. Someone was coming. Rose grabbed the nearest iron bar from the floor and backed toward the chests. The footsteps stopped. Then a man's voice drifted through the darkness. Rose? She knew that voice. It wasn't Thorne. It belonged to a man she'd never met. And somehow that frightened her more. The voice came again. Rose? She tightened her grip on the iron bar. A man's silhouette appeared at the mouth of the passage. He stopped when he saw her, one hand resting near the revolver at his hip. Rose raised the bar. Don't come closer. The man slowly lifted both hands. Fair enough. He was older than Thorne, perhaps 55, with a grey beard cut short along his jaw and a hat bleached almost white by years of sun. His clothes were worn but clean. A leather canteen hung from his belt. He looked past Rose toward the open chest. His expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. You found the old place? Rose kept the bar raised. Who are you? Eli Price. The name meant nothing to her. He nodded toward the passage. I followed your tracks from the canyon. Rose's eyes narrowed. You followed me. I found you first. She didn't lower the weapon. Eli glanced at the blood dried along her sleeve. You're hurt. I noticed. A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. Good. Means you're still thinking. He reached slowly for the canteen. Rose shifted the iron bar. Don't. Eli stopped. Then you can die thirsty. The bluntness caught her off guard. He unscrewed the cap and placed the canteen on the floor between them. I'll stay right here. Rose stared at it. Her throat burned. She lowered the bar just enough to reach the canteen, snatched it up, and drank. Eli watched without speaking. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Why were you looking for me? I wasn't. Then why were you in the canyon? Tracking a calf. Rose stared at him. Eli shrugged. Not everything in this country is connected to your trouble. That almost made her laugh. Almost. He looked again at the carved words on the wall. Water remembers what men forget. His voice had changed. Rose noticed. You've seen that before. Once? When? Eli stepped closer to the inscription, but stopped several feet away. 20 years ago. He touched the brim of his hat. My brother found this passage. Rose felt the iron bar become heavy in her hand. What happened to him? Eli looked at the floor. He disappeared. The chamber went quiet. Rose studied his face. There was no theatrical grief there, no dramatic display, just an old scar running beneath his left eye and a tiredness that seemed permanent. Did Thorne know? Eli's gaze snapped toward her. You know Silas Thorne? He threw me into the canyon. Eli's jaw tightened. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked at the open chest. How much did you see? Gold. That isn't what I asked. Rose hesitated. The wall, the key, the chests. Eli nodded slowly. Then you found the part your father was looking for. Rose went completely still. My father? Eli looked toward the dark passage behind her. Your father wasn't searching for land, Rose. He pointed toward the iron-banded chests. He was searching for proof. Rose lowered the iron bar. My father never told me about a place like this. Eli stepped past her, careful not to touch the chests. He wouldn't have. Why? Because dead men can't protect secrets. Rose watched him. The answer was too quick. You knew him. Eli's eyes remained on the wall. Not well. We met twice, maybe 3 times. When? First time was 7 years ago. Your father was looking at rock samples near the North Ridge. He asked me where the old trails ran. And the second? 2 years later. He came to my ranch after dark. Rose's fingers tightened around the canteen. What did he want? Eli finally looked at her. A shovel. That was all? That was all he told me. But you gave him one. I did. Why? Eli's gaze moved toward the chests. Because he looked scared. The answer sat between them. Rose walked to the nearest crate and brushed away the dust. Beneath it was a faded red mark, almost identical to the initials on the chest. RRG. What does that mean? Red Rock Gang. Rose turned. The outlaws? Eli nodded. They robbed freight trains, payroll wagons, ranches. 10 years ago, folks around Redemption blamed them for every missing dollar west of the river. What happened to them? They disappeared. Disappeared? One night they were there. The next morning, nothing. Rose looked at the gold again. How much? Eli crouched beside the chest. Enough that a man could live comfortably for the rest of his life. That isn't an answer. He picked up one coin. There's probably $40,000 in this chest alone. Rose stared at him. Her inheritance. $41,000. Thorne had fought her over a piece of land worth almost exactly the same amount. But this room held something far larger. Eli put the coin back. Don't touch any more of it. Why? Because gold isn't what worries me. He pointed toward a wooden crate. Rose followed his finger. The crate had been forced open long ago. Inside were rifles. Not old hunting rifles. Military carbines, several still wrapped in dark, hardened cloth. Eli reached into the crate and lifted one. He turned the weapon over. A number had been stamped into the stock. Rose saw his expression change. What? Eli rubbed his thumb across the marking. These were issued to the territorial militia. She stared at him. How would outlaws get militia rifles? They wouldn't. Then who put them here? Eli didn't answer. Outside, somewhere far above them, a horse whinnied. Both of them froze. Eli extinguished the lantern. The chamber vanished. Rose heard him move toward the passage. He whispered so quietly she almost missed it. Someone followed us. A second sound came from the canyon. A boot scraping stone. Then another. Rose pressed herself against the wall. Eli reached for his revolver. 3 men had entered the canyon, and one of them called down through the darkness. Silas said to bring the girl back alive. The voice outside came again. Silas said to bring the girl back alive. Eli raised one finger. Rose held her breath. 3 sets of footsteps moved across the canyon floor. One man laughed under his breath. She couldn't have gone far. Eli leaned close enough for Rose to hear him. When I move, you run. Where? Back through the passage. What about you? I'll catch up. She almost argued. Then a shadow crossed the narrow opening. Eli fired. The gunshot exploded through the chamber, deafening in the confined space. A man outside shouted, Another fired blindly into the darkness, the bullet striking stone above Rose's head. Dust rained down. Eli grabbed her wrist. Now! They ran. Rose stumbled through the passage, one hand against the wall. Behind them came shouting and another gunshot. Eli followed, moving faster than she thought a man his age could move. The passage forked. Rose stopped. Which way? Eli pointed left. They squeezed through a narrow crack just as footsteps entered the main passage behind them. The second tunnel dropped sharply. Rose nearly fell. Eli caught her by the elbow. Easy. I thought you said run. I changed my mind. Despite everything, a breath of laughter escaped her. They reached a low chamber hidden behind a curtain of hanging roots. Eli pushed Rose beneath the overhang. The men passed within 20 feet. One of them cursed. They vanished. Another answered, "Search the cave." Eli waited. Rose could hear his breathing beside her. Slow. Controlled. The third man spoke. "Thorne wants the papers first. The girl can disappear afterward." Rose looked at Eli. Her father's claim was still inside Thorne's possession. But now she understood something worse. They weren't hunting her because she had survived. They were hunting her because of what she had found. When the voices finally faded, Eli moved toward the roots. "We have one problem," Rose whispered. "Only one?" He glanced back at her. "The main passage is blocked." "How?" "They found it." Rose looked toward the darkness. "What do we do?" Eli pulled a small knife from his boot and began cutting through the roots. "We go deeper." They crawled through the opening. Beyond it was another chamber. This one contained no gold, no weapons, only a wooden table. On the table sat a metal box. Rose approached slowly. There was something carved into its lid. The same 4 words. "Water remembers what men forget." She touched the letters. Then she saw the keyhole. The old iron key in her pocket suddenly felt very heavy. The key fit perfectly. Rose turned it once. Nothing happened. She turned it again. A faint click came from somewhere beneath the table. Eli crouched beside her. "Don't force it." "I wasn't." "You were." Rose gave him a look. For the first time since the canyon, Eli almost smiled. Then the table shifted. A narrow section of the stone floor dropped half an inch. Both of them stared. Eli placed his hand against the edge and pushed. A hidden panel slid sideways. Underneath was a shallow compartment. Inside lay a folded piece of oilcloth, a brass button, and a small notebook bound with cracked brown leather. Rose reached for the notebook. Eli stopped her. "Wait." He pointed to the button. It carried an insignia, a star surrounded by the initials SM. "Sheriff's militia," he murmured. Rose looked at him. "You said the rifles belonged to the territorial militia." "I did." "Then why is a sheriff's button hidden here?" Eli didn't answer. He picked up the notebook with the corner of his hand and opened it. Most of the pages were blank. The first written page contained only dates. June 4th, June 17th, July 2nd. Each date was followed by a number. Rose leaned closer. "Those are shipments." Eli looked at her. "How do you know?" "My father kept accounts." She pointed to the figures. "Look at the spacing. Those aren't measurements, they're amounts." Eli turned another page. More dates. More numbers. Then a name. Silas Thorne. Rose stopped breathing for a second. The name appeared again on the next page, and again. Not as a buyer, not as a witness, as the person receiving the money. Eli's jaw hardened. Rose turned another page. A sentence had been written across the bottom in darker ink. The letters were uneven, as though whoever wrote them had been in a hurry. Never trust the man who owns the scales. Rose whispered the words. Eli looked at her. That's Thorne. How do you know? Because he owns the assay office. Rose remembered the land office, the mocking laughter, the claim paper beneath Thorne's hand. Everything began to connect. Her father hadn't been chasing a fortune. He had been following money. Money stolen years earlier. Money that had passed through Thorne's hands and eventually helped build half of Redemption. A noise came from the passage. Both turned. Eli closed the notebook. We need to leave. Rose took the oilcloth bundle. What about this? We take it. And the gold? Leave it. Rose looked toward the hidden chamber. Why? Because if those men find us carrying gold, they'll stop trying to arrest us. He glanced at the passage. They'll start trying to kill us. Rose tucked the notebook beneath her coat. Eli opened a narrow crack behind the table. Cold air rushed through. A way out. But before Rose followed him, she looked once more at the carved words above the compartment. Water remembers what men forget. She touched the inscription. Then she heard a man's voice behind them. Found you. The lantern light flashed across the passage. A pistol appeared first, then the face behind it. Silas Thorne had come down into the cave himself. Silas Thorne stood 20 feet away with a revolver leveled at Rose's chest. Behind him were the two men from the canyon. One had blood running from his temple. The other held a lantern. Thorne looked past Rose toward the hidden compartment beneath the table. His eyes settled on the notebook in her coat. You've been busy. Eli stepped between them. Put the gun away, Silas. Thorne gave a quiet laugh. Still pretending you're a lawman, Price? I never pretended. No, you just watched while this town became something your wife wouldn't recognize. Eli's face hardened at the mention of Mary. Rose looked between them. You knew, my father. Thorne's attention shifted to her. Your father knew when to leave things alone. He didn't. No. He became curious. Thorne's voice carried no anger. That made it worse. He started asking questions about old robberies, old shipments, men who became rich without ever earning the money. Rose felt the notebook against her ribs. My father found the Red Rock Gang. Thorne smiled. Your father found a story. A story worth killing him over? The smile vanished. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Thorne said, he was going to ruin good people over things that happened 10 years ago. Good people? Rose glanced at the sheriff's button. Is that what you call them? One of Thorne's men stepped forward. Eli's revolver came up. Don't. Thorne raised his free hand. The man stopped. Give me the notebook, Rose. No. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand enough. You understand nothing. He stepped closer. The Red Rock Gang murdered 12 men. They robbed government payrolls. They killed travelers. Your father found scraps of their records and decided he'd uncovered some grand conspiracy. Rose stared at him. Then why are you afraid of a notebook? Thorne's eyes narrowed. That was answer enough. Eli moved toward the side passage. Thorne noticed. Don't. Eli stopped. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the canyon. Rose looked upward. Rain. The monsoon season had started early that year. Thorne seemed to hear it too. You have until the storm reaches this canyon, he told Rose. After that, the passage floods. Rose looked at the narrow opening behind the table. Water. The inscription. The hidden compartment. Her father had understood something about this place, and suddenly she saw the pattern. The water wasn't only a way into the cave, it was a mechanism. She turned toward the wall. A thin stream ran through a groove in the stone, disappearing beneath the floor. Rose crouched. There were markings beside it. 3 shallow cuts, then another 3 farther along. Eli knelt beside her. "What is it?" Rose wiped away the mud. Underneath was a small arrow pointing toward the wall. She pressed her palm against the stone. Nothing. Thorn laughed softly. "Go ahead." Rose looked at him. He knew. That frightened her more than the gun. Then the first drop of rain struck the canyon floor, and somewhere beneath their feet something heavy began to move. The stone shifted another inch. Rose heard it beneath her knees. A deep, grinding sound traveled through the chamber, followed by a rush of cold water that burst from a crack beside the floor. Thorn's men stepped backward. "What the hell was that?" Eli grabbed Rose's arm. "Move!" They ran toward the side passage as water began spreading across the stone. Thorn shouted after them. "Stop!" Rose didn't. She ducked through the opening behind the table with Eli close behind. The passage narrowed immediately, forcing them sideways. Water chased them from the chamber, rising around their boots. Behind them came a gunshot. The bullet struck the wall. Rose flinched, but kept moving. The tunnel suddenly dropped. Eli caught her before she fell. "Careful." They reached a small ledge overlooking a dark shaft. Below, water rushed through a channel cut deep into the rock. Rose stared. This was built. Eli crouched beside the edge. He ran his fingers across the stone. Not by nature. Across the shaft stood a wooden platform, nearly rotten through. On it sat a metal box. Rose pointed. "That." Eli looked at her. "You're sure?" "No." She climbed down anyway. The wood groaned beneath her weight. "Rose, I can reach it." "That's exactly what worries me." She ignored him. One step. The platform bent. Another. A board cracked. Rose froze. Eli moved onto the platform behind her. "Give me your hand." She reached back. Their fingers locked. Together they crossed the remaining boards. Rose grabbed the metal box. It was heavier than expected. She pulled it against her chest. Then the platform collapsed. Eli shoved her toward the ledge. Rose landed hard. The box struck the stone beside her. Eli caught the edge with one hand. Rose seized his wrist. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Eli pulled himself up. Behind them, water thundered through the shaft. Rose opened the box. Inside was a bundle of letters wrapped in oilcloth. Underneath them lay a second ledger, and beneath that a single folded document bearing the seal of the territorial government. Rose unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page, then stopped. "What?" She handed it to Eli. He read the first line. His face went pale. "This is a pardon. For whom?" He turned the page. There were 6 names. The first 5 belonged to men Rose had never heard of. The 6th was unmistakable. Silas Thorn. Eli looked toward the passage. He wasn't hunting the Red Rock gang. Rose's voice dropped. He was one of them. A shout echoed from behind. Thorn had reached the chamber. Rose quickly folded the pardon and pushed it beneath her coat. Eli gathered the letters. They had found something far more dangerous than gold, a signed government document, a ledger, and names that could tear redemption apart. But as they turned toward the exit, Rose noticed one final line written across the back of the pardon. The handwriting was different from the official script. It was cramped and faded. Water remembers what men forget. Rose stared at the words. Her father's warning had not been a warning about the desert. It had been an instruction. And somewhere in this canyon there was still one thing they had not found. The thing they had not found was beneath the water. Rose understood it when she looked again at the pardon. The ink on the final line had run slightly, but the words were still readable. Water remembers what men forget. She folded the paper and slipped it beneath her coat. "Your father knew about this," Eli whispered. Rose shook her head. "He knew something. Not this." A violent crack echoed through the tunnel. Thorne's voice followed. "Rose!" She looked toward the passage. Eli motioned to the opposite wall. They moved quickly. The tunnel ended at a narrow shelf overlooking the underground channel. Water rushed beneath them, dark and fast. On the opposite side stood a stone door. There was no handle, no hinges, only a small circular depression in the center. Rose reached into her pocket. The iron key. She stared at it, then at the door. Eli understood. "Try it." Rose crossed the narrow ledge. The stone was slick beneath her boots. She kept one hand against the wall and held the key in the other. Halfway across, a gunshot cracked behind them. The bullet struck the stone beside Eli. "Go!" Rose reached the door. The key slid into the depression. She turned it. Nothing. She turned harder. A grinding sound came from inside the wall. The stone door opened inward. Rose stepped through, then stopped. The room beyond was small. A wooden desk stood beneath a shelf. On the desk sat a lantern, a dried ink bottle, and a stack of papers protected beneath glass. There was no treasure, no weapons, no gold, just records. Rose approached the desk. The first page carried her father's name, Thomas Vale. Her breath caught. Eli came through the doorway. "What does it say?" Rose lifted the glass. The page beneath it was dated March 3rd, 1887. Thomas had written only 4 lines. "I found the account book. Thorne is not the man he claims to. The money came from the Red Rock robberies. The government was paid to forget." Rose read it twice. Then she saw the page beneath. Another entry, then another. Her father's handwriting continued for 6 pages. He had been documenting everything. Names, dates, amounts, payments. On the final page, he had written something that made Rose's hands tremble. "If I cannot return, Rose must never trust the claim papers alone. The land is not valuable because of what lies beneath it. It is valuable because the records beneath it can prove who stole the money." Eli stared at the page. "Your father knew he was in danger." Rose couldn't answer. A floorboard creaked behind them. They turned. Thorne stood in the doorway. His revolver was raised. But this time, he wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on the papers. "Give me the ledger," he said. Rose backed away. "No." Thorne's voice dropped. "You don't understand what happens if those records leave this canyon." Rose held her father's final page against her chest. "I understand exactly what happens." She looked directly at him. "People find out who you really are." For the first time, Silas Thorne looked afraid.